I've been a journalist for 32 years, and I'm going to tell you about the saddest story that I've ever heard. Inside Camp 14, a 13-year-old inmate named Shin Dong-yuk betrayed his family. It was late at night. He was supposed to be asleep, but he heard his mother and brother talking about a plan to escape from the camp. The rules of Camp 14 are clear. If you try to escape, you'll be shot. If you hear someone talking about escape and you fail to report it, you'll be shot. Shin got out of bed, told his mother he had to pee, walked outside and found a guard. While he was snitching, he asked for more food and easier work. About 7 months later, he was taken to the execution grounds in the camp, a place that he'd gone to twice a year ever since he was 5 years old. There, the entire camp was assembled. There were about 20,000 people in Camp 14 at the time. He was taken to the front, and he witnessed the shooting death of his brother and the hanging of his mother. Before his mother died, she tried to catch his eye. He refused to look at her. For the next 10 years, he felt no guilt for his role in the death of his brother and mother. In concentration camp survivor stories, there is a conventional narrative arc. The protagonist is taken away by security forces from a comfortable home and a loving family. The most famous of these stories, I'm sure most of you have read, is by Elie Wiesel. It's called Night. In the book, he writes that after his entire family perished in the Nazi death camps, he was alone, terribly alone, in a world without man, without God, without love, without mercy. Shin's story is even darker. Words like love, mercy, family, for him had no meaning at all. God did not disappear or die. Shin had never heard of him. In Night, Wiesel writes that an adolescent's knowledge of evil should come from reading books. In Camp 14, Shin saw only one book, a Korean grammar, in the hands of his teacher, a man who wore a uniform, had a gun on his hip, and who beat one of Shin's classmates to death with a chalkboard pointer. Shin did not abandon civilization and descend into hell. Uniquely among all the concentration camp survivors we know, he was born there. He accepted its rules. He regarded it as home. In a very real way, Shin was a creation of the guards in Camp 14. They were quite literally his breeders. They chose his parents, who were young adults in the camp, and they ordered them to have sex. He was raised mostly by the guards. He had a very bad relationship with his mother. But he was raised by the guards to snitch on his parents and to snitch on his friends. It was a long-playing behavioral experiment run by the security apparatus of North Korea, and it continues to this day. The rules are very simple. The more you snitched, the more you ate. Let me ask you, how many of you knew before I started talking that there are concentration camps in North Korea? That's good. Well, there are about 6 of them, between 4 and 6. 135,000 to 200,000 people are in them right now. Half of them are the relatives of perceived political enemies of the state. The relatives. The way justice works in North Korea, there's collective punishment. If I were to say that the leaders were stupid and corrupt, my kids and my parents would go with me to a camp like Camp 14, and eating a diet of corn, cabbage, and salt, we would all be worked to death. These camps have existed for half a century. They're clearly visible on Google Earth. You can see them on your smartphone. North Korea continues to officially deny, that they exist. North Korea didn't invent these camps. They were invented in this form by Stalin. But when Stalin died in the former Soviet Union, the camps died out too. In North Korea, however, the camps have survived the death of the founding dictator. They've survived the death of his son, and they're thriving now with the third generation of totalitarian leadership, Kim Jong-un, who is about 28, 29 years old. Coincidentally, he happens to be about the same age as Shin. As you can see from this slide, the camps have existed twice as long as the camps in the Soviet Union, about 12 times as long as the camps in Hitler's Germany. And the reason? North Korea seems to have lost none of its appetite for being cruel to its own people. They're just as cruel now as they were 50 years ago. The camps are operated in almost exactly the same way. Shin's story is a case study in that cruelty. He's the only person so far, born and raised in those camps, to get out and tell his story. But his story is more than just a tale of state-sponsored sadism. It is an escape adventure, and it's a story about the resiliency of the human spirit. The guards in North Korea, in Camp 14, spent 23 years trying to turn Shin into a blinkered, malleable slave, and they failed. They failed because he was very lucky when he was 23. A newcomer came to the camp, and this was an individual who had been raised in Pyongyang, a member of the elite. He'd been educated in the former Soviet Union. Shin's job was to teach Park, that was the guy's name, how to fix sewing machines in a uniform factory. Shin was also supposed to snitch on Park to find out what he thought about the leadership and then report to his superior. For the first time in his life, though, instead of snitching, Shin listened to what Park had to say. Park broke the news to him that the world was round, which was news to Shin. He told him that the United States, South Korea, China existed. But he also said, and this is what got Shin's interest, he said, if you got out of here, if you got out of this camp and went to China, you could eat grilled meat. That's what interested Shin. He started dreaming about grilled meat. Within a few weeks, Shin asked Park to escape together. Park agreed. On January 2nd, 2005, they went for the fence, the electrified fence that surrounds the camp. Shin was supposed to be the Mr. Inside guy in this escape attempt. He was supposed to get to the fence first. Then Park, having more knowledge of the outside world, would lead them to China. Unfortunately, as they ran towards the fence on a snowy, cold evening up in the mountains, Shin slipped and fell on his face, and Park got to the fence first. He was electrocuted on the fence. Shin did not hesitate, though. He crawled over Park's smoldering body and ran off. The Mr. Outside guy on that escape attempt, unfortunately, was dead on the fence. But Shin still, through a combination of luck, keeping his mouth shut, and being shrewd, he found his way out of North Korea in 30 days. In a year and a half, he'd found his way across China and found his way to South Korea. 2 years later, he was living in Southern California. eating at In-N-Out Burger, which he still says is the best burger in the United States. And he was working for LINK, Liberty in North Korea, as a human rights volunteer. But he's not been a very happy person outside the camp. He's struggling to understand what it means to be free. He says that he's physically outside, but not psychologically outside barbed wire. One of the things he told me is that he's evolving from being an animal into trying to be a human being, but it is going very, very slowly. Very slowly. He still has dreams about his mother's death. What's terrifying, though, is that Shin's story is not an isolated tale of horror. There are two other big adjustment problems that are going on, or that will soon go on. There are 24,000 North Koreans now living in South Korea. Almost all of them have come there in the past 12 years. Almost all of them have been examined by government psychiatrists and psychologists in South Korea, who say that virtually all of them are clinically paranoid. A useful adjustment for life in North Korea, a place that crawls with security agents, but they have a very difficult time adapting to a modern life. They have a hard time distinguishing between criticism and betrayal. And there are 24 million people in North Korea who, if that state ever collapses, will have to go through the same adjustment problems. Now, no one is thinking that North Korea is on the verge of collapse, but totalitarian systems don't last forever. And someday, all of those people will have to go through a version of what Shin has gone through. Now, the reason Shin told me his awful story was because he wants you to know that these camps are still in operation. They're still breeding children. They're still teaching them to betray their parents. He doesn't believe that knowing about this is going to overthrow North Korea. But he went through the humiliation of telling me his story and is traveling the world talking about it because he believes that knowledge is better than ignorance. That things are going well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.